The story began under the light of a full moon, where the villain and his fiancée were praying to the gods to stop her melons from growing any larger. But never mind them, because on a not-so-peaceful day, an ugly girl was standing at the edge of the tallest bridge in Korea, acting as if she was ready to end her dull, monotonous life. Behind her, a handsome older man was desperately trying to stop her, shouting and saying anything he could think of to make her rethink her decision. The girl, however, looked both bored and confused, as though she didn't even understand why she was there in the first place. She wasn't even sure if today was the day she truly wanted to end it all, but the man behind her kept pleading, doing his best to convince her not to go through with it. Then, out of nowhere, her eyes widened as she heard someone shouting in disbelief that there was a person down in the river. She turned around, curious to see what was happening, only to realize that no one seemed to care about her anymore. Something, or rather someone else, had completely stolen their attention. To her shock, the men nearby started rushing toward the other side of the bridge, shouting that the currents had swept someone away in that direction. She was left speechless for a moment, but decided to check for herself to see if what they were saying was true. She leaned over and looked down at the river below, waiting to catch a glimpse of someone in the water. But instead of a person, she saw something else, a massive chunk of ice floating by. It wasn't just any small piece of ice, it was so large that it barely managed to pass under the bridge without causing damage. What truly stunned her, though, was what she saw inside the iceberg. There, frozen but somehow eerily intact, was a man's body. It was clear as day that he didn't belong to this era, and to make it even stranger, he looked unnervingly healthy for someone who appeared to have been trapped in ice for who knows how long. Hours later, the government stepped in and either saved, or better yet, captured that ancient man. Then a group of researchers from a secret organization gathered in a lab to study him and make sure he wouldn't pose a threat to the country. Seeing this man not only alive but in unbelievably good condition made their boss think that, with a body like his, they might finally be able to make cryo-humans a reality after years of struggling with insufficient knowledge. One of the researchers approached the boss, arguing that even if the boss's theory was correct, they shouldn't have the man tied up like some kind of dangerous criminal, but the boss had his reasons. According to the tests, this man's body wasn't like any other human from this era. In fact, every test result only confirmed how vastly different and stronger his body was, so much so that it couldn't even be classified as a typical human body anymore. The assistant tried to convince the boss to treat the man from 1,000 years ago as a gift from their ancestors, but the boss wasn't ready to see it that way. He believed there was a high chance that this ancient being could turn out to be a real threat to their country. Without budging, the boss attempted to leave the room, refusing to untie the man. Meanwhile, his assistant couldn't help but think the boss was being overly cautious for no good reason. Unbeknownst to both of them, the ancient man had already woken up from his slumber and broken free in an instant. It seems like the so-called special restraints were no match for him. A while later, when most people still had no clue about the existence of this ancient man, a sleazy guy was casually driving with one hand on the wheel and the other on a girl's thigh. He smugly claimed that this technique helped him focus better on everything. His little daydream with his girl was abruptly shattered when they suddenly heard cars all around them honking like crazy. At first they thought something was wrong with their car, but soon they discovered the real reason behind the commotion. The ancient man was running barefoot in the middle of the road. What shocked them the most wasn't just the fact that he was running in traffic, it was that he was keeping up with their car, which was going over 80 kilometers per hour. Even crazier, he wasn't just keeping up, he was overtaking their sports car like it was nothing. What started as surprise and confusion quickly escalated into chaos. Out of nowhere, the ancient man swerved to the right without any warning, cutting across traffic. That was all it took to cause multiple cars to lose control and crash in a series of accidents. As for the ancient man, he didn't care one bit about the chaos he left behind. Without so much as a second thought, he just kept running, aimlessly charging forward like nothing else mattered. The girl from the other day, the one who wanted to commit suicide or at least pretended to, was standing among the crowd. Her eyes and mouth widened in shock as she noticed it was the frozen man who was causing all the chaos wherever he went. But the ancient guy didn't care about the crowd, the commotion, or anyone else for that matter. He just kept running aimlessly, without any clear goal or purpose. The reason behind his behavior was simple. He was completely unfamiliar with this strange new world and genuinely believed he was dreaming. But everything felt far too real to be just a dream, and that left him questioning. If this wasn't a dream, then what was it? As he ran, the last memories he could recall began flashing vividly before his eyes. Back then, the person he loved most in the world had been cornered at the edge of a cliff. It wasn't just any small cliff. This one was 300 meters high, with a breathtaking waterfall cascading into a small lake below. The girl had thought she had no way out, no place to run or hide. To her, it seemed like the end. But standing between her and the group of attackers threatening her life was our ancient man, looking exhausted but unwavering, like he was ready to sacrifice his own life to protect the girl. Like a seasoned warrior, he blocked all attacks from the horde of dirty bastards trying to get to her, leaving them stunned by his incredible skill. Yet it wasn't just a handful of enemies he was up against. For almost 4 relentless days, he had been fighting non-stop, shielding the girl who was now huddled behind him. He was utterly drained from all the chasing and battles, every muscle in his body screaming for rest, but he had made his decision. This would end here, one way or another. With a swift and unexpected move, he swung his sword with such force that it pushed the attackers backward, giving the exhausted man just enough time to prepare for his ultimate move. Seizing the opportunity, he took a firm stance in a special battle posture. A second later, he focused all his energy, holding his breath in his chest. Using every ounce of his strength and a legendary martial technique, he swung his sword in a wide arc around him. For a moment, it looked as if nothing had happened. But then, the woods behind the attackers, which seemed untouched, split cleanly in two in the blink of an eye. As for the attackers in front of him, they didn't fare any better. No, they got the full brunt of his skill. The 5 remaining men out of 300 highly trained fighters were cut down in an instant by that single overwhelming move. The ancient man stood there, breathing heavily but feeling a sense of finality. It was over. He turned to the girl who had caused all this trouble and reassured her that her life was no longer in danger, because he had taken care of every last soldier who had come to capture or harm her. But his moment of victory didn't even get the chance to properly settle when a new figure emerged from the shadows. His voice echoed with a mixture of amusement and menace as he announced how impressed he was. The newcomer couldn't believe this man had single-handedly protected the girl and slaughtered all 300 of his elite soldiers. The new arrival wore a mask, something reminiscent of that guy from Naruto, and carried himself with a confident, almost arrogant air. He wasn't here to praise the ancient man. He was here to finish the mission his soldiers had failed to accomplish. However, our protagonist, Cheok Ryugeom, wasn't about to let some stranger appear out of nowhere and destroy all his hard work in a single moment. The mysterious man wasted no time and hurled his daggers from where he stood, fully aware that Cheok's body was already at its limit. On top of that, the poison coursing through his blood was taking its toll. Behind Cheok, the girl he had fought so hard to protect was crying, as if she already knew her savior was on the verge of losing his life because of her. But even in that dire situation, Cheok refused to give up, not for his own sake, but because the life of the girl he loved depended entirely on whether he won or lost. In an unexpected and sudden move, he threw away his sword, just as the mysterious man was mere seconds away from striking him down. This reckless action shocked the attacker, leaving him stunned and wondering why Cheok would suddenly make himself completely defenseless. Even in his state of surprise, the attacker didn't hesitate. He lunged forward and plunged his daggers into Cheok's body, but that was exactly what Cheok had been waiting for. In a final desperate act, he wrapped his arms tightly around the man and, with a heavy heart, turned to the girl he loved. "Farewell," he whispered softly, knowing he wouldn't live to see her smile again or receive any kind of reward for his sacrifice. With his body completely exhausted and no other way to ensure her safety, Cheok made the ultimate decision. He leaped off the cliff, holding the only remaining enemy in his grasp. As they plummeted together, he left the girl behind, safe but heartbroken, watching as the man who had risked everything for her disappeared into the abyss below. In that moment, the force of the wind blew the mysterious man's mask off, revealing the face beneath it. To Cheok's surprise, the person wasn't as old as he had seemed but much younger, showing no emotion even as they both plummeted downward. The real shock came when Cheok managed to get a clear look at his face. It didn't take long for him to not only recognize the man, but to have his eyes widen in disbelief at the identity of the person behind all his suffering. It was Okayaan, someone who had always acted like a close friend to Cheok. On the other hand, with a smirk, Okayaan casually mentioned that not only did he not regret his actions, but he actually enjoyed seeing the look of shock and betrayal on Cheok's face. Still holding him tightly, Cheok couldn't help but wonder why Okayaan would do such a thing, but there was no time to get an answer. With lightning speed, the two of them crashed into the water below, their bodies sinking together into the depths. That was the last thing Cheok could remember before snapping back to the present day. He was jolted out of his thoughts by the flashing lights of several police cars blocking his path, preventing him from causing any further chaos. One officer quickly jumped out of his car, rushing to disperse the crowd that had gathered around the area. The officer warned bystanders that their lives could be in danger if they stayed any longer. Meanwhile, 2 other officers stepped out, their expressions tense as they announced that this was an emergency situation. They added that orders had come directly from the higher-ups, and they needed to deal with Cheok as quickly as possible. Without wasting any more time, they cautiously approached Cheok, who stood still, lost in his thoughts, unaware of, or maybe indifferent to, what these men wanted. His mind was completely consumed by thoughts of Yan and how he had survived after falling from the waterfall when he had 2 daggers in his chest. Then, one of the cops, with his unpleasant look, shoved his face way too close to Cheok's and, without bothering to figure out who he was, told him to cooperate and not cause any trouble. He even warned Cheok that if he didn't, things would get really messy between them. But Cheok paid no attention to the cop nor to his surroundings, because he still was thinking he should have died from the impact of the fall. His stillness made the cops think he wasn't going to resist, so they moved in to grab him. Suddenly, an idea struck Cheok. It was the only thing that seemed to make sense of the situation. He wondered if this was all the work of one of Yan's followers, that woman with the, well, melons bigger than watermelon, and of course the ability to create illusions that trap people in their own minds forever. But Cheok wasn't the type to just sit back and let someone mess with his head. Determined to fight back, even if it was just an illusion, he suddenly struck out, sending the cops flying before they even knew what hit them. Seeing how things were spiraling out of control, one of the other cops decided to use a taser to stop or at least temporarily immobilize Cheok. But the boy effortlessly caught it midair before it could even touch his body. Even though the tip didn't go directly into him as an electric weapon, it should have still carried enough charge to knock out any normal person. For some reason, though, that didn't happen to Cheok. The boy was so distracted by this minor threat that he completely forgot about the others, letting his guard down. That's when it happened. 3 more tasers hit him at the same time, and this time the combined shock definitely had an effect. None of the 3 cops expected the others to act at the exact same moment, so they ended up hitting him all at once. The amount of electricity coursing through him was enough to kill an average person, but Cheok still stood, unfazed, slowly reaching for the wires connected to his body. Without a second thought, he yanked them out and used enough force to knock the tasers right out of the cops' hands. He was now fully convinced this was all part of some illusion, and he needed to find a way out, no matter what it took, to return to the girl he loved most. He didn't think twice before using some of his strength to teach the cops a lesson about not messing with him. The scene, unsurprisingly, left the onlookers completely stunned. But what shocked them the most was how a single person not only took the police tasers, but used them to strike back with such overwhelming force, like the cops were nothing. The situation escalated quickly when the special police forces arrived at the scene, fully prepared to take Cheok down by any means necessary. Cheok could sense the danger and decided it was time to figure out a way to get out of this chaos unharmed. Gathering all his strength, he jumped, shattering the ground beneath him. The force of his leap was so powerful that it sent the cops' cars flying into the air for a moment. But this wasn't just any jump, it was something inhuman. He leaped like a giant grasshopper, effortlessly escaping the special forces in less than the blink of an eye. No one could believe what they had just witnessed from someone who looked like an ordinary human being, not even the special forces. Not long after the police failed attempt to capture or stop Cheok, a man, who happened to be the director of the National Intelligence Service, was furiously yelling at someone over the phone. He was blaming the chaos on the man in charge of Cheok's research. The researcher, while accepting the blame on the surface, knew deep down that they had already done everything they possibly could. According to Minwoo, the director, and what they had learned about Cheok's body, even the police special forces might not stand a chance against him. Frustrated, Minwoo demanded a solution to stop that ancient guy and end this chaos. But the man in charge of the lab was just as clueless as Minwoo. The only thing he was sure of was that Cheok was on a completely different level compared to any other human of this era. Minwoo, however, wouldn't stop yelling at him, insisting he come up with a solution instead of repeating what they already knew, because the situation was urgent and they needed to report everything directly to the president right away. Meanwhile, behind Minwoo, someone was silently watching footage of the day's events on his phone. Calmly, he interrupted Minwoo, telling him to stop being so harsh on the researcher, as none of this was his fault. Sitting in the shadows with his face partially obscured, the man announced that he would personally take responsibility for dealing with this so-called ancient guy from now on. Believing Cheok was someone from hundreds of years ago and powerless against modern technology, the man proposed an idea: use advanced weaponry to take him down. As he revealed his plan, the military's heavily armed vehicles were already rolling into the city, heading straight for Cheok's location. Just one of the helicopters in their fleet had the firepower to obliterate an army, but to ensure their success, 4 of them had already been dispatched to track Cheok. Seeing those war machines for the first time and having no idea what they were capable of, Cheok got ready to face them. But he quickly realized that wasn't his only problem. Nearly 20 Special Forces soldiers had already cornered him from the opposite side. Still, none of it fazed him. Fear wasn't something Cheok felt easily. The only issue was that he didn't have any weapons to fight back. Calmly, he walked to the side and picked up what turned out to be a broomstick, confidently holding it like he was about to take them all down with that ridiculous thing. He didn't actually know if he could handle all of them, but in his mind, he was still convinced this was all just an illusion, and nothing about it could scare him. To prove they weren't joking around, one of the Special Forces soldiers fired a warning shot, the bullet landing right between Cheok's legs. It was less about warning him and more about showing that no matter how strong a martial artist might be, there's no way to stand against a gun. For the last time, the Special Forces told Cheok to surrender and not make things worse. The soldier who had fired the warning shot was even backed up by his comrades, who praised him, saying he was always the first to charge headfirst into challenges without fear. But to everyone's shock, Cheok wasn't paying any attention to their warning at all. Instead, he was warming up his body, stretching and preparing himself for the fight like he hadn't just been surrounded by heavily armed soldiers. The Special Forces soldier who had warned him was dumbfounded by Cheok's reaction. He couldn't figure out if the guy was stupid, unbelievably overconfident, or genuinely clueless about what guns were capable of. Things got even weirder for the soldier when he realized that the ancient guy was actually serious about fighting them with that stick. Cheok stood in a stance straight out of an old martial arts manual, looking every bit like a warrior from centuries past. His sheer bravery, or maybe his craziness, somehow impressed the soldier in front of him, as well as the others watching, but it also made the soldier realize something. It was time for this ancient man to understand that the world had completely changed since the era he seemed to belong to. Smirking with excitement, the soldier placed his finger on the trigger, ready to take Cheok down at any moment, but before he could act, something unexpected happened. A commanding voice interrupted, ordering everyone to stand by and not make a move. Moments later, a police helicopter appeared overhead, grabbing not just Cheok's attention, but everyone else's as well. From the helicopter, a man in a suit jumped down with surprising confidence, acting as though he was determined to resolve everything peacefully, without anyone getting hurt. Inside the helicopter, his subordinates were keeping a close eye on Cheok, ready to intervene if he did something reckless. The man in the suit began walking forward slowly, carefully trying to appear friendly as he greeted Cheok. He introduced himself as Kang Ji-kun, a representative of the country, and none other than the president of South Korea. Believing he had the situation under control, President Kang gestured to the soldiers and ordered them to lower their weapons, assuring them he would handle things from this point on. On the other side, Cheok had no idea what a president even was, but when Kang Ji-kun mentioned being a representative, it made him wonder if this man was some sort of king for this land. And, in a way, President Ji-kun kind of confirmed it, choosing not to go into too much detail about his role since this wasn't the time for a history lesson. Instead, he apologized for any inconvenience and for arriving so late to welcome Cheok to this era. Trying to make things easier for Cheok to understand, the president explained that this was the future version of the country Cheok once lived in, now known as South Korea. Without showing any hesitation, President Ji-kun stretched out his hand for a handshake, kindly inviting Cheok to a better place where they could talk more about everything peacefully. Cheok hesitated for a moment, unsure if this man was telling the truth or if it was some kind of trick. His eyes focused on the president's outstretched hand, but his mind was racing. What did he mean by a better place? Was it a trap, or was it some kind of scheme to convince him to stay in this illusion world forever? Everyone around them watched the scene carefully, completely stunned by how their president was acting so politely and respectfully toward this mysterious ugly guy. After a few seconds, Cheok finally began to move his right hand slowly. At first, it looked like he was going to accept the handshake. But instead of reaching for the president's hand, Cheok grabbed his stick and, in a sudden and unexpected move, swung it directly at Ji-kun. The strike seemed to aim straight for the president's throat, as if to cut it off with nothing but a simple wooden stick. The reason behind Cheok's actions was tied to his beliefs. To him, the king of this land had to be the key to escaping what he still thought was an illusionary world. In his mind, taking down the leader might somehow break him free from the trap he believed he was in. Seeing this scene made the guards realize that their worst nightmare had come true, and with nothing else they could do, the man who looked just like Minwoo shouted, "Fire at will!" The guards in the helicopter, along with all the police special forces, aimed their guns at Cheok, ready to turn his old scars into hundreds of fresh holes. In those tense moments, right before chaos erupted, President Ji-kun suddenly raised his hand and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Cease fire!" Even Ji-kun himself wasn't sure what had just happened. For a moment, like everyone else, he genuinely felt like his head had been chopped off, but now he was completely fine. Sweating in terror, he couldn't tell if that vivid sensation was just his imagination or if Cheok had somehow miscalculated and stopped short of delivering the killing blow. A little distance away, Cheok stood still, again ignoring everyone around him as if they didn't exist. He had just figured out what he needed to know. He hadn't come here to kill the president in the first place. His goal was to confirm whether his theory about this world was correct. From everything that had just unfolded, Cheok reached a quick conclusion. No matter how talented that woman was at creating an illusionary world, There was no way she could plan out everything this perfectly. The president was still holding his throat with one hand, unsure if he'd actually been hit or if it was just his imagination, all the while wondering what was wrong with this ancient monster. Cheok, however, ignored him completely, just as he had before. Slowly, he was piecing together his new conclusion. Beyond everything he had just realized, the pain he felt when he was shot by tasers, the moments he used a bit of his power to teach the police a lesson, and even the time when he used his strength before attempting to jump, all of it felt far too real to be part of some illusion. In Cheok's opinion, no human could create a world this realistic. It was only natural for anyone to feel disoriented after waking up 1,000 years in the future, and even for Cheok, it was hard to process the truth. But now, he finally realized. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't an illusion. It was all real. Minutes or maybe hours later, they moved to the president's safe house without any further arguments or trouble. Assuming Cheok would be starving after a millennium of sleep, they offered him food. Only Cheok and President Ji-kan sat at the table, facing each other, while dozens of guards surrounded them, keeping a sharp eye on the ancient man to make sure he didn't cause any more problems. Before doing anything else, Cheok first asked where he was and why they had brought him there. The president explained that it was a secret base of his, one he had never used until now. Trying to change the subject, he urged Cheok to try the food, mentioning that it was something Cheok had definitely never eaten in his past era. To build some trust, the president started eating first, all the while wondering if Cheok was finally coming to terms with the fact that he was now almost 1,000 years in the future, something Cheok had already pieced together back when they had almost torn each other apart. Once Cheok nodded in confirmation, the president brought up another topic. He asked if Cheok had noticed why he could move so freely again, especially after being frozen in ice for hundreds of years. Cheok hadn't really thought about it until now, and his curiosity was piqued. That's when Ji-kan explained that it was all thanks to the advanced medical technology of this era, something that didn't exist back in Cheok's time. It was the president's subtle way of reminding Cheok to be grateful. But instead of showing any gratitude, Cheok fell silent for a moment, his mind drifting to another realization. His empire, the one he had fought for as a royal soldier, had fallen and no longer existed. The weight of this truth hit him deeply, filling him with sadness. President Ji-kan noticed the shift in Cheok's demeanor and tried to comfort him, understanding the pain of losing something so deeply tied to one's identity. Standing up and offering a piece of meat, which he carefully placed on Cheok's rice dish, the president declared that he could offer generous support to help Cheok adapt to this new world. But, as was obvious from the beginning, he wanted something in return. He wanted Cheok to cooperate with him from now on. Cheok couldn't help but wonder what exactly the president meant by cooperate. At that moment, the president ordered Minwoo to turn on the TV, and Minwoo immediately did as he was told. The screen lit up, showing a news report from earlier in the day. A regular citizen was being interviewed, describing what he had witnessed. The news anchor confirmed the story, calling it the hottest topic of the day. The anchor mentioned that it all seemed connected to the man found in the Han River Glacier, someone with supernatural powers and rumored to be the one causing all the recent chaos. However, the anchor went on to reveal that these rumors weren't true. He explained that it was actually just the main character of a movie being filmed, and all the events people were talking about were staged performances. None of it, he said, was real. Cheok sat silently, watching the broadcast and following every word the TV was saying. As he remained focused on the screen, the president approached him from behind and calmly explained that this was all part of his plan, to keep Cheok hidden. In the president's eyes, ordinary people weren't ready to accept the existence of a superhuman being just yet. Kang Ji-kan was partly right. Convincing society that they had found a frozen man from 1,000 years ago, especially one with supernatural powers who wasn't a threat to their lives, was no easy task. On top of that, many countries had spent years trying their best to discover how to extend human life, only to fail because they lacked the most critical element to achieve that goal. Now, with Cheok's body, this country could finally turn that dream into reality before others. The president tried to be both reasonable and honest, explaining that, for the sake of his country and its future generations, they needed Cheok to cooperate with their research. Minwoo and the other bodyguards stood silently, watching how rude Cheok was being, remaining seated while the president stood before him, as if he were the one in charge. Things took a sharp turn when Cheok suddenly stood up and made his way toward the door, refusing both their support and any offer to cooperate. In just a few seconds, he reached the exit, slowly opening the door without anyone daring to stop him. Before stepping out, he turned back and said coldly, "I'm not stupid enough to let others take advantage of me so easily." But as he was about to leave, two towering bodyguards appeared in front of him, blocking his path. It seemed President Ji-kan had anticipated this exact scenario and had prepared a backup plan. Suddenly, those guards grabbed Cheok's hands, and in an instant, every single man in the room pulled out guns seemingly from nowhere and aimed them directly at him. Jikon, no longer bothering to hide his intentions, smirked and declared, "It seems there's no need for me to keep up this friendly act anymore to convince you." The moment his words ended, his men fired their weapons all at once. However, these weren't ordinary guns or bullets. Instead, they were loaded with darts containing a powerful tranquilizer, designed to hit their target with precision. The guard standing closest to Cheok, like everyone else in the room, knew Cheok had already resisted police tasers earlier. But he was confident there was no way Cheok could handle this much tranquilizer. After all, even a single dose was enough to knock out an elephant. But in the very next moment, his confidence shattered. His eyes widened in shock as he noticed something strange. The darts didn't even touch Cheok's skin. It was as if some invisible force, some kind of red protective barrier, was shielding his body. Before anyone could fully process what was happening, the tranquilizer darts began falling to the floor one by one, completely useless. That's when Cheok, with an expression that hinted he was done holding back, canceled his barrier. In a single fluid motion, he broke free from the guards restraining him, effortlessly flinging them away with just a simple move of his hands. It became clear to everyone in the room that this wasn't someone they could overpower so easily. The scene left the president and everyone else in the room stunned and, of course, deeply shocked. It made them realize that even their backup plan had completely failed. Yet, despite everything, Cheok still tried to avoid hurting anyone. However, the president was a persistent man, determined to stop Cheok from leaving no matter what. This time, his men pulled out high-voltage shockers seemingly out of their asses and began to approach Cheok in unison, closing in from all directions. One of them, overly confident, jumped in front of the others and taunted him, saying he should just give up and agree to become their experiment subject already. The rest of the guards quickly followed, surrounding Cheok with what they believed was an inescapable trap. Then, with a sneaky move, one guard attacked from behind, striking Cheok with the shocker as he smugly declared that these devices were 10 times stronger than a standard police taser. But in the very next moment, instead of seeing Cheok collapse, the guard froze in shock. It was as if he had struck an illusion, something like an afterimage. Before he could even process what had happened, the others rushed in, trying to land their own hits. Yet, just like the first guard, they were met with the same unbelievable result, their attacks seemingly connecting with nothing but empty air. Strangely enough, Cheok kept moving forward without getting hit. Either he was so fast at dodging and weaving that no one could track him, or he was using some kind of skill that made him move like an untouchable ghost. Either way, he slipped through the crowd of attacking guards one by one, as if he were taking a casual stroll through a park. Cheok looked down on them so much that he didn't even bother to fight back or stop them from trying to get in his path. The last guard was left speechless, much like others. As Cheok passed by him, the guard couldn't help but wonder if it was even possible for a living being to reach such an incredible level of power. But Cheok, like always, paid no attention. Without a second glance, he made his way to the secret base's exit, leaving behind dozens of skilled guards and their supposedly advanced weapons completely stunned. Not long after, President Jikon found himself in a tight spot. He couldn't believe how easily his entire plan had fallen apart, and now the country was teetering on the edge of chaos once again. The ugliest president finally realized it was impossible to capture Cheok alive by force. Frustrated, he turned to Minwoo, demanding he find an alternative solution. But before that, they had a bigger problem, figuring out where Cheok had disappeared to after leaving the base. Minwoo, however, knew this wouldn't be easy. He admitted, "It's going to take a lot of time, and we'll need to deploy a lot of our men to track him down." Just then, a man burst into the room and, to everyone's surprise, announced that they had found the ancient guy's location. Strangely, he was somewhere they could easily spot him within minutes, because he was standing on the rooftop of the tallest building in the city. President Jikon's eyes widened in disbelief as he instantly realized what was about to happen. His worst fear became reality when Cheok found himself with only one option left. Cheok didn't want to live in this strange and unfamiliar world, where everyone looked at him like he was some kind of alien. So, without hesitation, he jumped off the building, choosing to end his life rather than be used or abused. Cheok had no reason to keep living in this era. The girl he loved was no longer by his side, and he had no purpose to motivate him to start a new journey here. The only thing that had ever kept him going was the thought of revenge, but even that was meaningless now, as he had come to realize that Okyeon no longer existed. As he fell through the air, wind rushing past him, Cheok felt a strange, familiar sensation. It reminded him of the day he and Yeon had fallen from the waterfall together. But this time, he was determined to finish what fate had left incomplete last time. He let his body relax, savoring his final moments, convinced that he was finally about to reunite with his one and only love after so long. It should have only taken a few seconds for him to crash onto the cold, unforgiving ground, but each second dragged on like an hour, long and unbearable. Just when he truly believed it was the end, with death only a heartbeat away, his eyes suddenly widened in shock. Something strange caught his attention. On the side of a nearby building was a billboard with a picture of a boy who looked eerily similar to Ʞ𝗡𝗢𝗡. The resemblance was uncanny, like they were twins, except this boy had a shorter haircut. Cheok's calm acceptance of death was instantly replaced by a mix of anger and disbelief. As he hurtled past the billboard at lightning speed, just moments away from becoming an ancient pancake, he couldn't help but wonder, could it really be possible that Ʞ𝗡𝗢𝗡 had been transported to this era, just like him, or was this boy someone else entirely? In an instant, the memories of how Ʞ𝗡𝗢𝗡 suddenly showed up out of nowhere with his G-Cup companion started flooding Cheok's mind. That sneaky guy, with the help of that woman, stirred up chaos, messing with everyone's heads, filling their minds with fake illusions, and driving Cheok's family and friends to turn on each other like maniacs. Cheok managed to save the unconscious girl, but aside from her, he couldn't protect anyone else. There, he swore on his family name that he'd never forget what Ʞ𝗡𝗢𝗡 did to him. Ʞ𝗡𝗢𝗡, on the other hand, couldn't care less about what Cheok was thinking. He had no plans of letting him live long enough to become a problem. But in the end, things didn't go as either of them had expected. Still, it was satisfying enough for Cheok, who believed that at least he'd gotten his revenge and saved the girl he loved. Now, though, everything felt different. The one who had slaughtered his entire family and circle of friends might have been transported to this era, just like him, alive and well. Cheok couldn't bear the thought of dying pointlessly while that scumbag was still out there. Determined, he made up his mind, instantly changing his decision. Like Superman, in midair, he flung his hands out wide, stopping himself from crashing into the cold, hard ground by tapping into some of his supernatural powers. That sudden stop in midair caused a powerful shockwave in the area, but oddly, there wasn't a single sound. After hovering for a moment, Cheok slowly landed on the edge of the building he was about to crash into. Below him, people carried on with their daily routines, completely unaware of what had just happened right above their heads. Cheok's eyes locked onto the billboard in front of him. His anger kept building, his body practically radiating heat as he stared at it, growing more furious with each passing second. Meanwhile, reports of the incident quickly reached President Ji-kan, leaving him stunned. All they managed to witness was Cheok jumping off the building, but no one could explain what happened after that. The president ordered his men to search the area and at least recover the ancient man's body, assuming it had to be somewhere near the building. But to his surprise, his men had already combed through the entire place and found no trace of him. The only thing they discovered was a few people who mentioned that a strange man had been asking questions about the picture on the billboard. Aside from that, he hadn't caused any trouble. Whether it was Ʞ𝗡𝗢𝗡 or not, the person Cheok was searching for seemed to be going by a different name in this period, Yu Yeonwoo. A short while later, Cheok came across another picture of Ʞ𝗡𝗢𝗡 and couldn't help but wonder why there were so many images of him everywhere. This time, a schoolboy standing nearby decided to step in and give him an explanation. To the boy, Cheok must have looked like some villager from the countryside who didn't know anything. Based on what he'd just learned, Yu Yeonwoo wasn't anywhere near ordinary. In fact, he was the exact opposite. That guy was a world-class action movie star. He was so famous that probably everyone in Korea, except for Cheok, knew who he was. Apparently, from a young age, he had shown incredible acting talent and wowed the world with his daring performances. Since then, he'd caught the attention of directors from both the West and the East, creating plenty of blockbuster hits over the years. But that wasn't all. Beyond his acting skills, Yu Yeonwoo's striking looks and handsome face had earned him a massive global fan base, making him as popular as an idol. In the boy's opinion, Yu Yeonwoo was the best of the best, so successful that he even helped raise Korea's reputation on the world stage. For Cheok, though, things didn't add up. The Ʞ𝗡𝗢𝗡 he knew was nothing like this kind of person. After thinking it over, he came to a conclusion that made the most sense to him. Yu Yeonwoo might just look similar to Ʞ𝗡𝗢𝗡, or they were actually the same person. If that was the case, Ʞ𝗡𝗢𝗡 was wearing a mask and playing the role of a good guy in this era. Determined to uncover the truth, Cheok decided he needed to track him down and get answers. He asked the boy with glasses to guide him to Yu Yeonwoo's location, while casually landing a soft punch on the billboard or whatever it was out of frustration. But his hope was crushed almost instantly when the boy, with a mocking tone, told him it wasn't that easy for someone like him to just meet a superstar like Yu Yeonwoo. The boy was teasing Cheok, thinking he was just an ordinary guy, but his smug attitude flipped in an instant when Cheok smashed the screen in front of him with a direct headbutt. The boy stumbled back, falling to the ground in shock. Horrified, he started begging Cheok to spare him, insisting he hadn't meant to offend him. Cheok, glaring down at him, promised not to hurt him, on one condition. The boy had to spill everything he knew about Yu Yunwoo's whereabouts. Trembling and stuttering, the boy quickly confessed he'd recently read an article saying Yu Yunwoo had already left the country for some business overseas. Cheok felt a pang of disappointment upon hearing this. He realized he wouldn't be able to confront Yu Yunwoo right away since the man was currently in a foreign country. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, in the United States, Yu Yunwoo was sitting in a restaurant, quietly enjoying his meal. Nearby, someone was voicing their frustrations, ranting about broken trust and betrayal. But Yu, as if he couldn't hear a word of it, calmly continued eating. Suddenly, a massive man stepped into the scene. A towering figure with dark skin and without any warning delivered a heavy punch to Yu's face, sending him stumbling back. Behind him stood two other men, their presence adding weight to the confrontation. The man who had thrown the punch leaned closer, his voice low and menacing, demanding that Yu leave the place immediately, with no arguments, no hesitation. The next moment, with a dead serious expression on his face, the man suddenly froze, completely forgetting what he was about to say. He turned to the back of the scene and shouted, "What's the line again?" That's when it became obvious. It was all part of a movie recording, and they were just acting. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he'd forgotten his lines, and of course, it was starting to frustrate the director and producers. They even joked that he might be doing it on purpose out of jealousy toward Yu Yunwoo. The man's name was James, and while he played it off as just another accident, deep down, he knew he was pushing everyone's patience to the limit. Yu Yunwoo, on the other hand, didn't show any reaction at first. He just sat there quietly until, out of nowhere, he called James over. Then, with a calm smile on his face, Yu said something that caught everyone off guard. "Hey James, since you already hit one side of my face, why don't you just hit the other side next? I can't talk properly if only one side's been punched." Before James or anyone else could respond, the unexpected happened. The chain holding the chandelier above them suddenly snapped. Whether it was Yu's doing or just a freak accident didn't really matter. What did matter was that the massive chandelier was falling directly toward James. James froze, completely stunned, unable to move a single muscle. He just stood there, waiting to see what would happen next. In an unexpected move, Yu Yunwoo, who had been sitting calmly just moments ago, suddenly leaped into action. He pushed James out of harm's way, saving the man who had been deliberately beating him. His intentions weren't exactly clear, but it was obvious he wasn't thrilled about having to do it. The chandelier came crashing down onto the floor, sending dust and debris flying everywhere and causing a huge commotion. People rushed toward them, shouting their names and anxiously checking if anyone was hurt. Yu Yunwoo, standing in front of the stunned James, loudly announced that they were fine and had avoided a major disaster. Despite being the one who had taken the brunt of the impact, Yu remained calm and didn't make a big deal out of it. All he said was that he needed to visit the hospital before the next shoot. Later that day, Yu was at the hospital getting his injuries treated. As he looked down at his hand wrapped in bandages, he answered a question from the man standing beside him. His manager, or whoever he was, had asked why Yu had risked his life to save someone who had repeatedly bothered him. Yu, with a casual shrug, replied that his body had simply moved on its own. Strangely enough, it hadn't turned out to be a bad thing. The incident had earned him even more attention and admiration from everyone around him. Maybe, just maybe, that had been his goal from the start. What happened next, however, was unexpected. Yu Yunwoo began apologizing to the man, saying he was genuinely sorry for causing the production to come to a halt because of his injuries. The man tried to reassure him, but then mentioned something else, something much more serious, that Yu needed to worry about. The man seemed hesitant, struggling to get the words out, but when he finally said it, Yu Yunwoo was utterly dumbfounded. His face froze in shock, as if he'd just been told something as bizarre as him being pregnant, or something equally absurd. Meanwhile, at the presidential palace in Korea, commonly known as the Blue House, President Ji-kan dismissed all his staff and asked them to leave, saying he needed to work on something important. They quickly left as instructed, and Ji-kan headed toward his office. Just as he was about to enter, a voice saying, "I've been waiting for you," caught him off guard. It was Cheok, of course, casually leaning against the wall, waiting for the president. Ji-kan was genuinely surprised to see him here, especially since the palace was heavily guarded and its security system wasn't something anyone could just bypass without being noticed. Still, Cheok didn't seem to worry Ji-kan about his safety. In fact, the president almost seemed glad to see him again, because this wasn't the first time they'd met like this. Almost 9 hours earlier, while Ji-kan was busy with his usual presidential duties, he had been shocked to see an unexpected visitor walk into his office. It was Cheok, who wasted no time and bluntly asked if the offer for cooperation was still on the table. Ji-kan, trying to stay composed, assured Cheok that they could both achieve what they wanted, but said there was something he needed to clarify first. He pulled out a photo of Yu Yanwu, placed it on the desk, and asked why Cheok was looking for this man. But instead of answering, Cheok simply demanded to be introduced to Yu Yanwu, who was currently overseas. President Jikon didn't insist on getting an answer. Instead, he asked for a promise of full cooperation in return. Just like the first time they met, he stretched out his hand for a handshake, something that felt a bit unnecessary and unusual in Cheok's eyes. Still, after a brief moment of hesitation, Cheok took the president's hand for the handshake, sealing the deal between them. Back to the present, Cheok and Jikon were standing in front of a door when Cheok asked when he would finally get to meet Yu Yanwu. At first, Jikon acted like it was a nearly impossible task even for a president to bring such a well-known figure from the other side of the world back to Korea. But then, with a casual tone, he told Cheok to just open the door and step inside, because Yu was already there. Inside the room, Yu Yanwu was waiting, though clearly for the president and clueless about Cheok. With a less than pleased expression, Cheok stepped in and finally laid eyes on Yu, still unsure if this man was the same Ʞ𝗙𝗡 he remembered. As soon as Yu saw the president, he greeted him warmly, introduced himself, and said it was an honor to meet him in person. He then stepped forward and shook President Jikon's hand, showing his respect. In return, the president thanked Yu for accepting his request and coming so promptly. Before Yu Yanwu could say anything else, he was surprised to see the man standing behind the president also greeted him. It was Cheok, who carelessly pushed the president aside and made his way over to Yu, deliberately introducing himself just to gauge Yu's reaction. Cheok's boldness didn't just shock Yu, it caught the two men accompanying him off guard as well. Yu, however, remained composed and polite. He again introduced himself properly, saying he'd heard great things about him from the president. Jikon, trying to keep the situation under control, suggested everyone take their seats and continue the meeting, completely unaware of Cheok's true intentions for being there. But Cheok wasn't paying any attention to what the president was saying. Instead, he kept holding on to Yu Yanwu's hand, refusing to let go, leaving Yu visibly confused and a little uncomfortable. Cheok was determined to get to the bottom of things, right there and then. With that goal in mind, he decided to use his supernatural powers to investigate Yu Yanwu. To Cheok's disappointment, he quickly realized that, unlike Ʞ𝗙𝗡, there was not even a trace of internal energy within Yu's body, and thus they could not be the same person. His hopes for revenge, which had been so strong, now seemed utterly pointless. Feeling both frustrated and defeated, he let go of Yu's hand immediately. In a soft, apologetic tone, he said, "Sorry for holding on too long. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." President Jikon once again invited them to sit down and continue their conversation in a more relaxed manner. Wanting to give them some privacy, Jikon announced that he would step out for a while, coming up with an excuse and saying he needed to use the bathroom. However, since he didn't fully trust Cheok, he quietly instructed Minwoo and the security team to keep a close eye on both of them. Yu Yanwu's managers also excused themselves, deciding it would be best to follow the president's lead. Feeling completely hopeless, Cheok sat across from Yu, staring blankly at his cup of tea, lost in thought. For a fleeting moment, he considered giving up entirely, ending his now seemingly meaningless life once again. But before he could sink deeper into despair, Yu noticed how different and defeated Cheok looked and decided to try to lift his spirits. Out of nowhere, Yu called Cheok's full name in a tone so familiar that it made Cheok's eyes widen in shock. Yu slowly stood up, and as he did, he leaned in closer and whispered softly, "So, you're still alive." In that moment, it became crystal clear that Yu Yanwu was truly Ʞ𝗙𝗡. He had been hiding his true identity all along, pretending to be someone else. The moment Yu Yanwu revealed the truth when no one else was around, he immediately noticed the shift in Cheok's demeanor. A dark, black and red aura began radiating from Cheok, making him look like he was ready to do whatever he'd been holding back for so long. And of course, the way Ʞ𝗙𝗡 spoke, fearless and almost teasing, only made Cheok feel worse. Ʞ𝗙𝗡, on the other hand, sat confidently in his chair, showing no concern, even though his strong, longtime enemy looked like he was seconds away from attacking him. Meanwhile, Cheok couldn't help but wonder, was this man really Ʞ𝗙𝗡? And if he was, how had he completely missed detecting any internal energy or chi from him earlier? The only explanation that came to mind was that Ʞ𝗙𝗡 had somehow gained the ability to hide his chi perfectly. Casually sipping his tea, Yu Yanwu asked, "What's the point of all this? Hunting me down and killing me won't change anything that happened in the past." His calm words seemed to make Cheok less agitated, though his resolve didn't waver. Now, Cheok wanted answers before he struck. First he asked, "How long has it been since you awakened in this era?" But when he didn't get a fast response, he pressed on with another question, this time wondering aloud if being reborn in this period of time was one of Ʞ𝗙𝗡's tricks, or if he even knew anything about it. It wasn't clear whether Ʞ𝗙𝗡 was lying or telling the truth, but but he claimed that no human could possibly possess the ability Cheok was suggesting was a trick. Cheok was kind of convinced or pretending like that, but he still had one more question, the last and most important one. He wanted to know if Okyeon knew anything about the girl he had once protected, wondering if by any chance she had also moved to this era. Okyeon didn't like the way Cheok asked that question in such a menacing tone. Perhaps the question itself simply reminded him of his own past failure, which made him feel that way. After finishing his tea, or coffee, or whatever it was, Okyeon didn't give a clear answer. Instead, with a teasing tone, he replied, "It's a shame. I wonder too if that girl ended up here, or if she just died back then." That was the moment Cheok couldn't hold himself back any longer. With a sudden, powerful move, he slammed the table in front of him, splitting it clean in half. The splintered table struck Okyeon with such force that it completely caught him off guard. What shocked Okyeon the most wasn't just the strike. It was the fact that, even though he managed to block it, the sheer force sent him flying backward at an incredible speed. He crashed into the wall behind him so hard that it was as if a car had smashed into it, leaving a massive hole in the thick concrete wall. It became clear that Cheok hadn't just used physical strength to hit the table, he had unleashed a portion of his godly power. Seeing that Okyeon had no intention of answering his question and had even mocked the girl he loved, Cheok made his decision. He would find the answers himself, no matter what. Whether it meant forcing Okyeon to spill the truth or scouring the world to search for her himself, he wouldn't stop until he uncovered what he needed to know. Unlike the last time, when Yu Yunwoo was seriously injured just by saving James with a simple act, this time, the devastating strike didn't leave a single scratch on him. Casually, he stepped out of the massive hole his body had created, looking completely unbothered, like nothing had happened. Not only did he show no fear of facing Cheok, but he even seemed happy, because he had just realized something. Taking Cheok down was going to be much easier than he had originally thought. Before officially starting the fight, Okyeon asked for a moment's pause. He wanted to make sure their battle wouldn't be interrupted by any intruders. Not that Cheok cared about anyone else being involved. In the blink of an eye, Okyeon created an illusory space that perfectly mirrored the room they had been in, giving the impression of two old friends reuniting and reminiscing about the past. This was a precaution in case the president or his guards decided to check on them after all the commotion. Once his preparations were done, Okyeon dashed toward Cheok as fast as he could, but before he got anywhere close, he froze in his tracks because Cheok wasn't preparing to fight back. Instead, he shouted, "Cut the nonsense already!" Cheok's voice was sharp and commanding, and his actions made it clear he wasn't playing along anymore. Tossing a pine cone idly in his hand, he calmly declared, "You're not Okyeon. I figured it out." The revelation was sudden, but logical. The Cheok standing there wasn't the kind of person to be fooled for long. The reason for his conclusion was simple. The Okyeon he knew never had the ability to create illusions. And, on top of that, Cheok realized something else. Something that made him even more certain. Despite doing his best to hide his chi and internal energy, the moment he tried to defend himself, a small amount of it slipped out, and Cheok caught it instantly. That tiny trace of chi was all he needed to recognize the truth. It wasn't Okyeon at all. In fact, it was his G-Cup follower. At that moment, her true form started to reveal itself, either because of something Cheok had done or because she lost control of her disguise. He, or rather she, was completely stunned. She couldn't believe how easily Cheok had seen through her disguise and figured out the truth. Even so, she didn't falter. She stood her ground, still confident that she could take Cheok on by herself. Cheok, on the other hand, wasn't just angry. He was also confused. He remembered exactly what this woman had done to him and his family, but there was one thing he couldn't wrap his head around. Back then, before he took Okyeon down with him, he had personally cut off this sneaky woman's oversized chest with his own hands and thrown her off a cliff like she was trash. So how in the world was she still alive, standing here in front of him as if nothing had happened? But her chi didn't lie. It was definitely her. Yoon Unya, that woman, smirked with a creepy smile plastered across her face. She didn't offer much of an explanation about how she survived or what had brought her back. Instead, she revealed only part of her role in the present. With a sly tone, Uni admitted that Yu Yeonwoo was truly the same person as Okyeon, and her job? To disguise herself and play the role of Yu Yeonwoo whenever he was too busy to handle things himself. Overestimating her own strength, Uni wasn't about to let this chance slip away. She wanted to take down a worthy opponent for the sake of her master, to make the bond between them stronger. With that thought in mind, she intertwined her fingers, forming a symbol that resembled scissors or a cross. In the next moment, multiple clones began emerging and leaping out of her body, her signature illusion clone technique. Driven by the hope of impressing her master and earning a reward for her success, Oni commanded her clones to take Cheok down immediately. She hadn't even finished speaking when, in the blink of an eye, Cheok was already riding on top of one of her clones, stabbing his giant staff into the clone's lower stomach with terrifying precision. Uni was completely caught off guard, not only by how fast he had taken down her clone, but also by the sheer amount of chi he was unleashing. The intensity of his power wasn't something she had encountered often, and it threw her off balance. Cheok's anger was palpable. He didn't care about anything except silencing this loud, big melon woman once and for all. For a brief moment, his action made Uni think Cheok was being way too reckless, pouring out so much unnecessary chi like an idiot. She assumed his newly awakened body wouldn't be able to handle such an intense outburst of power and that he would collapse at any moment if he continued this. To her shock, Cheok not only didn't collapse, but before she could even blink twice, he had already destroyed another one of her clones. The situation was spiraling out of control for Uni, faster than she could have imagined, and unfortunately for her, this was only the beginning. The ancient guy, using a secret martial technique, moved like a hurricane, tearing through everything in his path. Neither Uni nor her clones could do anything to stop him. In the midst of the chaos, after being struck mid-air, Uni couldn't help but wonder how she hadn't seen this coming. One by one, her clones vanished into thin air, leaving her as the only one left. Beaten and defeated, she realized she had to think fast and come up with a way to satisfy Cheok before she got killed for no reason. Before she could even try to pull any sneaky move, or, knowing her, maybe even take her clothes off, Cheok cut through the tension with a question. He looked at her coldly and said, "I'm certain I killed you before. I saw it with my own eyes. You fell off that cliff, critically injured. So how are you not only alive but here, traveling into the future like nothing happened?" To be fair, she had no idea how she had survived either. She admitted that she was just as certain she had died after falling from that cliff. But to her surprise, and based on what she could remember, one day, she had simply woken up in a completely unknown place for her. The experience was bizarre, even for her. It felt as though she had reincarnated into another world, and the whole thing was as much a mystery to her as it was to Cheok. However, she did remember one thing clearly. After her initial confusion and shock, she had realized that Okyeon was standing right in front of her. According to her, he was the one responsible for her reawakening. Uni's explanation only deepened Cheok's suspicion. His theory that Okyeon was somehow behind all of this reawakening of future strange incidents seemed to be getting closer to reality with every passing second. Despite giving Cheok some useful information, Uni wasn't about to betray her beloved, handsome master without putting up a proper fight. She snatched her hairpin and charged at Cheok with all the speed her graceful legs could muster. Cheok stayed perfectly still until the very last second, when the hairpin was just a centimeter away from his eye. With an unexpected, lightning-fast move, not only did he block her attack, but he also landed a powerful blow that sent Uni flying back several meters. She slid across the floor before coming to a slow stop against the wall. Cheok began walking toward her, his voice sharp and taunting. "Do you really think Okyeon saved you because she cares about you? How pitiful." He kept approaching, his footsteps deliberate, and asked another question. "How long have you been awake here?" Uni, still trying to catch her breath, answered, 1 month. Cheok didn't waste a moment before asking the next question. "When did your body start rotting?" Uni froze, confusion flashing across her face. "What the hell are you talking about? Rotting?" she snapped. To make his point clear, Cheok moved suddenly, tearing part of Uni's shirt with his stick. Stunned, Uni gasped as part of her body was exposed. She instinctively tried to cover her magnificent boobs, but her hand couldn't fully hide them because they were so big. Worse yet, there were unmistakable signs of decay on her shoulder, something she had desperately been trying to hide. Cheok seized the moment to press Uni further, pointing out that rotting isn't something that happens naturally to a human body. It only occurs when a skilled martial arts master uses a forbidden technique on someone, and the person he was referring to was none other than Okyeon. He told her bluntly that Okyeon only saw her as a disposable tool, a vessel to carry out dirty work on his behalf, only to be discarded like useless trash afterward. But, of course, that wasn't something a loyal follower like Uni could accept. She screamed from the depths of her lungs, insisting there was no way Sir Okyeon would ever betray or exploit her. Besides, she argued, she'd never even heard of a rotting technique. Cheok, still watching her struggle to cover her left chest with one hand, calmly reminded her to think it over. He explained that the technique he was talking about was a rare and forbidden one, which was why she hadn't heard of it. As for Okyeon, he urged her to ask herself why he would always give her the dirtiest and most dangerous tasks, forcing her to disguise herself in his place and carry them out without question. This time, Cheok's words started to sink in. Uni found herself lost in thought, his accusations planting seeds of doubt. She began to reflect on her actions, realizing she might have unknowingly been responsible for massacring countless innocent lives, all because she blindly trusted Okyeon. The thought of being nothing more than a disposable vessel for Okyeon, abused and burdened with the heavy guilt of taking so many lives, left Uni feeling absolutely horrified. She realized that her fate might be no different from the people she had killed, except for one cruel twist. She would rot away with no way to stop it. But to her relief, and of course surprise, Cheok mentioned that he knew how to stop the rotting. Placing a hand gently on her shoulder, he explained that the only way to counteract the rotting was to inject inner chi that directly opposed the chi infused into her body. That, he said, would prevent the decay from spreading any further. Cheok decided to demonstrate it himself. His hands began to glow with red chi, and moments later, the rotting part of her body began to heal almost instantly. Uni watched in amazement as her skin turned smooth and clear again, just like it had been before. The sensation was surreal, leaving her stunned. But as relief washed over her, Uni couldn't help but question everything again. Was this really Okyeon's doing? The person she had followed so loyally, without a single doubt, her entire life? To help her make a quick decision and understand the reality of her situation, Cheok explained there were only two people in this era who could completely heal the rotting in her body by injecting inner chi, himself and Okyeon. He pointed his staff at her and told her to choose between them, urging her to think carefully before making any rash decisions. It only took Uni a few seconds to make up her mind. Instead of taking her shirt off completely, she fixed it back on and, to Cheok's surprise, gently grabbed his staff. Looking him straight in the eye, she told him she would do whatever he asked from now on, because she just wanted to live a better life. Cheok, instead of acting like a pervert or punishing Uni for everything she'd done to him so far, simply told her there was only one thing she needed to do for the time being: become a double agent. It was the last thing Uni expected or even wanted to hear.